Welcome to the Daily Apple. I'm your host, Kevin White. Emma Ryan and I will dive into all topics related to the science of longevity, along with some other subjects we just find of interest, with the hopes to provide useful information for everyone. This stems from my personal interest to optimize the human condition, to not just live longer, but to live better. Okay, Matt Dawson. It's good to be with you, man. I've got Matt Dawson here with me. Welcome everybody to the Daily Apple. Thanks for kind of tuning in. I'm really excited about sitting down with you today, Matt. And so I really appreciate you making time because I'm pretty stoked about what you're doing and everything. So today we're going to talk about Tru Diagnostic and really the best test that I know on the market right now for biological age testing, and it really goes deep into that. And so we're going to get into that, and I'm going to get into some of your origin story and everything. But you're a different style of physician than that I've ever really met, because your origins and everything went from the emergency department, and it really went off. And so I kind of think that's cool. So anyway, but tell me a little bit about yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying I'm different. The other day, somebody called me weird, and I said, "That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me." Yeah, I definitely don't want to be standard for sure. So no, I appreciate it. It's great to be here. Yeah, we have a pretty similar background, right, Kevin? We came from kind of the emergency medicine world and transitioned to more concierge medicine. I'm not sure about your kind of transition, how you thought about it, but for me, while I loved emergency medicine, and it's such a privilege to be with people on sometimes the worst day of their life and to be able to make an impact for them. And I really enjoyed it. But I just felt like I was seeing the same things over and over, the same patients coming back over and over. And while it was great to be able to put a breathing tube in, save their life, do something dramatic for them, I just had this real desire to get further upstream from the problems and see if I could make a bigger impact for folks and keep them from getting in the situations that they're in. And that's what kind of led me out of emergency medicine 7 or 8 years ago, whenever it was.
It's funny you mentioned that. People would say, isn't that exciting? You never know what you're going to walk into. And my response after a few years of that was like, well, actually, you kind of do. It's kind of the same thing every day. And it's a lot of chronic disease over and over and over again, and the repercussions of that. So yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, very similar. You were raised in Kentucky, right?
That's right. Yeah. Rural Kentucky.
And you went to med school there, and then you went to residency in Utah, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. I had the nice in-state to it, and I had a scholarship to UK, so it made sense to stay home for medical school. And then I went to Utah for residency, where I just fell in love with the mountains out there, the skiing and the mountain biking, and it was really great being out there. Really enjoyed it.
Oh yeah. It's definitely worth it to stay for the in-state tuition. There's no reason to. Yeah. I went to University of Oklahoma for med school as well. So, that must have been a great experience. So take me through. So you did that, and you graduated. You went through residency program. You were a board emergency physician, and then you just kind of. So take me through after that.
So when I did a fellowship in point of care ultrasound as well. So as soon as I got out of residency, kind of my thing, what I did was education very quickly. So I took a job in an academic center, teaching medical students, teaching other specialties and other residents, this kind of new technological skill that's coming out that can make a big impact. So from the very beginning, it was me seeing, okay, what is emerging? What is the science and evidence around something new that I can kind of teach others? And did that for 7 or 8 years, maybe. Yeah, I think that's about how long at the university. And then I started, as we talked about, getting a little disenfranchised with just the people weren't getting any better, seeing the same things over and over, and wanting, and I also started seeing all this science emerging around precision medicine and genomics. And that it looked like for the first time we could really tailor treatments to the individual down to the level of DNA and get really specific. And we had known for a while that, sure, pharmacogenomics, you can look at someone's DNA and tell what they're going to respond to, like which SSRI, or if they are going to respond to SSRIs or a statin, is it going to be efficacious for them? Are they going to have side effects from it? So we knew you could do pharmacogenomic testing, but it looked like you could also apply that to every part of your lifestyle, from what you eat, how you exercise, supplements, how to optimize sleep, all of these things. So I got really interested in that, went down a real rabbit hole around genomics. My co-founder of Wild Health, Mike Mallon, he and I both, we sequenced our own genes. He had a really difficult issue that came up around his lipids. His lipids, we found out, were through the roof, like familial hypercholesterolemia. He saw his physician. His physician told him to do a certain diet that works for most people, but he's not most people. He got worse. His doctor wanted to put him on a statin in, which is fine. Like, most people do great with a statin, but he didn't. He had really bad myopathy, muscle breakdown, didn't tolerate it. And as he was going through this, we had just looked at his DNA. We had just sequenced his DNA. And when we started really digging in, we saw that, wow, he has all these specific sensitivities and these specific SNPs that mean he should probably be on the opposite diet of what his doctor had put him on. And he also had a very specific SNP that made him pretty much guaranteed to get that muscle breakdown and myopathy from the statin. And we were at first like angry, like, why did his doctor not do this? Why did he have to suffer? And then we remembered, oh yeah, nobody's doing this. Like, the science is out there, but nobody's doing it. So we left. We started a company called Wild Health that did precision medicine, that did all that testing, and we did that for the last 6 years until now. As you mentioned, I've transitioned to working with Tru Diagnostic. And while I was very focused on the genomics for so long, I thought that was such a powerful tool, and it is. It was a little over a year ago or so when I realized that it pales in comparison to epigenetics. And that is where I feel like the real future is in epigenetic testing and what we can do with that.
So how did you come across that field of epigenetics and kind of falling into the Tru Diagnostic pathway?
Yeah, so we had used Tru Diagnostic in Wild Health for a few years, their biological age tests. And that's fine. Like, I'll be honest, 2 or 3 years ago, I wasn't excited at all about biological age tests. I felt like, okay, a patient comes to me and they're chronologically 40. If they're biologically 36 or 44, I'm going to try to optimize them either way. Yeah. So I wasn't super excited about biological age testing. I did get much more excited a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, when the PACE test came out. That was the first one that I really thought, okay, I really like this test. As a clinician, it can really help me. So the PACE test is different, and it gives you a pace of aging. And this was developed by Duke, a big cohort from Dunedin, New Zealand. That's what's called the Dunedin pace. And it gives you a pace from like 0.6 to 1.4. What I like about the test is a couple things. One, it's very sensitive to change. So if you get pregnant, your rate of aging goes up about 20%. But when you deliver the baby, it comes back down. Being pregnant is a physiologic stress. Same thing if you have hip surgery, get in a car accident, get COVID, your rate of aging goes up, it comes back down. So when I saw this, I realized this could be really helpful in designing in-one experiments for patients. So if, for example, Stanford did a study recently, a twin study, where they switched people back and forth between vegan and omnivore diet. And they saw in 8 weeks, they could have big effects on pace of aging. So I thought, great, this is a way. We're making a hypothesis with patients about their genomics. What is the best diet? But let's test it. Let's see how their pace of aging changes. If somebody wants to do a carnivore diet, great. Let's just measure your pace of aging. If they want to do a vegan diet, let's try it. Somebody wants to get IV stem cells or try rapamycin or something like that. Well, now we have an objective measure to test the pace of aging, do the intervention for a few months, retest, and see. And then we can do an intervention at a time over a couple of years and really dial in. Because if a patient asks me, does rapamycin slow down aging? I would say, well, I'll looking at the studies, probably. But what I really want to know is, does it slow down aging for you? Not does it slow down aging for 60% or 80%? So let's try it in you. And I really saw this pace of aging test as a way to really dig in and do these really cool experiments with patients.
Yeah, I do like that pace of aging. I've seen that all over the map, and it really matches somebody's lifestyle. I had a patient, he just works out way too hard, doesn't sleep. His pace is just garbage. So I do like that piece of it. And I do like your comment. I wasn't too excited about these 2 years ago because there are a lot of these aging tests are just not that great. And, that'll show somebody's age like 25 or 26. And you did a good job. I did see your little post there about kind of critiquing the, Peter and Andy's little talk there. And I thought that was really good to kind of bring up to speed what's going on right now. And this is a whole new new thing. But
and I hope it didn't come across too aggressive, because everything that Peter said, I agreed with 2 years ago, and that's what I'm trying to say to Peter. Like, and no one can keep up with all the literature like up to the
Right.
minute. And this is my field, and I just wanted him to update his thinking based on the most recent research, because the things he was talking about and referring to, I think, are crap also. But there's non-crap tests now, so let's talk about those.
Yeah, it was soft. It was well put, so I thought it was good. Go ahead.
And I will say too, you asked how I got into Tru Diagnostic. When Tru Diagnostic, so when they approached me about a year ago, they wanted me to look at some science they had coming out and emerging. And I didn't come to Tru Diagnostic. While I really love the PACE test, I didn't come for that at all. So I came because about a year ago, I saw some non-public science and some things they were working on that I became convinced was the most exciting thing I had seen in science and medicine. That's why I came over. There was specifically a study that they were doing with Harvard, which we finished now, and we'll put our first pre-pub out in about a week on it. But what epigenetics and DNA methylation can do in the future, that's what I'm most excited about. Biologic age testing is really cool. I think it can be really helpful when dialing in someone's kind of global rate of aging. But the stuff that's going to emerge in the next few months is the stuff that I think can really change the world of medicine when it comes to diagnostics.
And the fact it is so personal. The reports, we've been using them for about a year, and I do like how they've kind of evolved, especially with, there are other pieces you guys have been layering on and everything, which has been great. Before I get into it too much, kind of talk about how would you explain how the test works? We both understand that, methylation, which is just, a carbon with hydrogen on it that attaches to different spots on the DNA, and that happens over time, kind of like, scratches on a record or whatever. But how would you describe kind of the nuts and bolts of how that works and what you guys look at?
Yeah. So with Wild Health, as I mentioned, we're looking at genomics. We look at your actual DNA sequence. And that's important. That's your human operating system. But that only accounts for 20% of your health outcome. The other 80%, everyone understands, is epigenetics and everything you do, what you eat, what you're exposed to, your stress levels, how much you exercise, like you're talking about the patient of yours, how you sleep. All of those things turn these genes on and off, turn them up and down. They change the expression of the genes, and that expression of the genes accounts for 80% of your health outcome and your end phenotype, when you die, what diseases you get, how you feel and perform. So that expression of the genes is what we're looking at through DNA methylation. So the way we turn those genes on and off is through methylation. So when you methylate a gene, that turns down the expression. How much it's methylated determines how much it's turned down. So Tru Diagnostic, when we look at we get a dried blood spot card, a few drops of blood from someone, we look at about 1 million genes and how much each one is turned up and turned down. And from that is how that big data, and then using machine learning, is how we can determine biological age and rate of aging. It's also why we can get so much more information, which is the thing that I'm excited about. So to give you an example, the GRAIL test, the test for 50 cancers.
Yeah.
They do that through DNA methylation, the same thing. Because when you get a cancer, if you get pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, you start expressing your genes very differently, like you would if you're eating something. So massive changes in gene expression. So they will look and find the epigenetic fingerprint of, this is what gene expression looks like when you have breast cancer or pancreatic cancer. Same thing for the Cologuard test from Exact Sciences. It's looking at gene expression. When you get colon cancer, you're expressing your genes very differently. So you can technically find an epigenetic fingerprint for anything, whether it's a biologic age or a cancer, or if your listeners right now, if they're annoyed by the sound of my voice or comforted by it, that changes their gene expression, like just the surges in kind of cortisol or their other hormones and things. So if we took 1,000 of your listeners and I gave a very annoying talk, and then 1,000 I gave a great talk, we could draw the blood, maybe find the epigenetic fingerprint of listening to a good versus bad talk. So you could apply that to other things. So the study that we did with Harvard, we looked at two things. We thought, well, can we find the epigenetic fingerprint for cardiovascular disease, for depression, for COPD, for chronic kidney disease, just like GRAIL does for cancer? And we haven't published that yet, so I can't talk about the exact data, but it's one of those things where when we got the results, I'll always remember where I was when we got them, because they were phenomenal. The other thing that we're going to publish on the next week, so I could go ahead and talk about it a little bit, because it'll be out very soon, is a few years ago, this guy named Marioni did something where with epigenetics and DNA methylation, he found that he could predict someone's CRP level. So CRP obviously is a measure of inflammation in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And he could get a predicted one by looking at the epigenetic changes related to inflammation. So he then wanted to see, well, how good is this predicted CRP? So he compared it to the traditional kind of LabCorp CRP. And what makes a biomarker good is how much it correlates to disease. That's why we order biomarkers, to see if someone has a disease. So hazard ratio and odds ratio. So when he compared this predicted CRP to the traditional one, the predicted one actually performed better. And at first, this was a big surprise, but then it made sense. Like, just like we don't care so much about a spot random glucose. We want A1C, the average over time.
Right.
Same thing for CRP. If you work out hard, you get a spike. So it's up and down. But this epigenetic marker was measuring the biologic effect of inflammation over time. So it was a much more stable and predictive CRP. So in this Harvard study, Harvard has a 100,000 patient biobank that we can pull all these patients and look at their phenotype and then find these epigenetic patterns. We set out to see, can we find another like 5 to 10 or a dozen upgraded biomarkers? Because that CRP, that was an upgraded version of CRP. Well, we ended up finding 1,600 biomarkers that perform better than their traditional biomarkers. And if you were to just sequence all of those traditional biomarkers, it would cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. So with a few drops of blood and hundreds of dollars, you get hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of information that actually perform better to disease. So that's what I saw a year ago that was potentially possible. And now we're going to publish on it. And that is what I think is really going to change diagnostics, to be able to, a few drops of blood, predict nearly everything. And we're launching in the next couple of weeks our first test based on that, which will look at about 150 or 160 of the best ones that we identified, to give a ton of information about toxins, hormones, vitamins and minerals, and things like that. So that's the exciting thing in epigenetics.
That takes the idea of getting somebody's true fingerprint to a whole different level. You know, while you're on that, it's crazy how all this happens through a drop of blood like that big, or that big. Does that kind of blow your mind sometimes that that's what we're doing?
Yeah, I was just talking to someone last night who was a wild health patient. And I was explaining this to him, and he's like, "Yeah, last time I had my blood draw, they drew like 20 vials of blood." Yeah. And he's like, "And technically, the information they got is way less than what you're going to get with that." And I said, "Yeah, it is." And it's because, honestly, even a blood spot card with a few drops of blood, all we really need is one drop of blood, because we just need to look at your genes. We're not needing to spin things down and like separate things out like we do with normal blood testing. Right. We just need to see that gene expression, which is present in every drop of blood. So his comment was like, "Y'all are actually doing what Theranos wanted to do." And I said, "Yeah, but actually way bigger. Like what we can predict with epigenetics, you're limited only by your imagination and the size of the data set. So it's going to get better."
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, but I was holding back on that. But yeah, that's exactly. Let's see. So what's your retest frequency? Obviously, you do these. It's actionable on a whole other level. Do you tend to retest these in about 6 months, a year? What's the average on that?
It's a good question. So what we used to say is for the Tru Age test. So I'll talk about the Tru Age specifically, because Tru Age, biologic age test, very different from this new test I talked about, which will be called Tru Health. So the Tru Age test, we used to say, test every 3 to 6 months to see changes, see if it works. With the Stanford trial where they were looking at diet, they were retesting in 8 weeks and saw a change. So it depends on what you're changing. If you're just taking some new supplements or medication or like a single molecule, it's probably going to take a little longer to see a change, because we're a complex system. If you're doing a dramatic change in diet, then you'll probably see within 2 months. If you're going to do whole body IV stem cells, then you probably could do the test, do the stem cells, do it pretty quickly after a few weeks and see a change. So like for me, I'm testing every month. That's overkill. In general, quarterly, if you're doing a lot of experiments, if you're not doing much of a change and you're just randomly following this, then 6 to 12 months is an okay time frame.
So you're doing every month personally, huh?
Because I'm just doing a lot, and I'm always looking for trends and things, and knowing that I'm not doing great experiments. If I'm going to design the experiment, like if I'm going to start rapamycin, for example, I'll test every month, but know that I'm probably really looking at kind of a 3-month period to see the changes. Yeah. So I'm a little overkill on it, but I love data. So the more data I can get, the better.
So what are some interventions? I mean, we both know, there's some significant lifestyle interventions that have been shown to make a big difference alcohol, smoking, sleep, stress, nutrition, all those things. But like, what are some things that you've really seen, whether it be in patients or yourself? Obviously, and there's other things on the end of supplements and peptides and stuff like that. So I know this is a really broad question, but what have you seen, whether it personally or with patients, or maybe that surprised you in interventions and really moved the needle?
Yeah. So Yale just put out a preprint a couple of days ago where they looked at kind of 51 different interventional trials and what moves the needle in these clocks and what doesn't.
Yeah.
The issue with that paper, I'll go ahead and tell you, is a lot of the trial, it was very different trials, different time periods. It wasn't really uniform. So some of their findings could be people were misinterpreting it, and it's a little bit misleading. For example, they had included a couple trials around exercise showing not that big of a difference, but in our internal data, we see exercise making a really big difference. So I'll tell you what we've seen, because we have the biggest data set in the world on. We've seen the lifestyle things are what make the biggest difference. The things that obviously, like you mentioned, like smoking and alcohol, but exercise, stress, nutrition, being in a calorie deficit state, those tend to make much bigger differences than supplements and other molecules like that. What I'll say for anyone that is looking at the Yale study, they found some interesting things like hyperbaric oxygen. There's some trials that showed it did well. Anti-TNF medications, anti-tumor necrosis factor medications. But this was done in people who had kind of autoimmune and a lot of inflammation. It makes sense. Those things decrease inflammation. So it makes sense that they would slow down your rate of aging. A couple of the things that they found that they reported in the study didn't make a difference, like exercise does. Like we've just seen that. So I like to say that if anybody's reading this study, don't misinterpret it. It's a very small study there. We've got good data that exercise does. Another one that they found didn't make a difference, but it was a very bad study, so I like to talk about this, was rapamycin. There was only one study that looked at rapamycin, and they used rapamycin from a compounding pharmacy. We know that the bioavailability of it was like less than half, and so the dose that was used, there's no way it would have an effect. But we have seen a bit of an effect with internal. So I just want to point that out for anyone that sees that trial coming out. I wouldn't hang your hat on all of that. In general, I'll go ahead and tell you from our data, the lifestyle stuff, exercise, stress, sleep, nutrition, those are the biggest ones that make a big difference.
Yeah, I was interested on your thoughts as far as the rapamycin. I'd love to see a better study on that, like an adequate, non-compounded, so it can get to where it needs to get, so you can actually get the result. So where do you see all this going? Like, we talked a little bit before. I was just asking you questions. Sometimes I've had patients who don't drink alcohol and it shows that they do, or different things. I don't know what that's about, but what are some improvements you see in the study on the horizon? Where do you see it going?
I always say, to me, the definition of science is getting closer and closer to an approximation of the truth. It's never like a full-blown, like this is the answer. So these clocks and the predictors are getting better and better. Like we have exclusive rights to dozens of clocks at Tru Diagnostic that we can report on. And we only report on 3 biological age clocks now because we think they're the 3 best. So lots of different predictors we can predict on. We've taken a lot out. We used to just kind of dump all the information to people. Say, here you go. We're just reporting on it. We try to pull back on that and just use the ones that are more predictive. Some of the things, it's interesting. You mentioned the alcohol thing. It's really interesting. So smoking is another predictor that we have. We actually have shown that if you ask someone how much they smoke, and then we look at their epigenetic predictor of how much they smoke, the epigenetic predictor is more predictive of mortality and their actual health outcome than their self-report. So because what we're measuring is not how much they smoked, but the epigenetic biological impact. So some people may not smoke a lot and have more of a negative impact than someone who smokes a little more, their actually biological impact. So the alcohol one is interesting. We always have some, like with any test you do, there's like some false positives, false negatives. So, but also when we ask people if they smoke and drink alcohol, we have false positives, false negatives. People aren't always perfect with that. And if I think about lab values, my last labs I got done, my liver function test definitely looked like I'm a big drinker. And I wasn't. And it was because I finally figured out why. I'd done a massive workout that morning and just had a little bit of liver shock from that.
Yeah.
So whether it's a massive workout causing a little bit of liver shock or what it is, like no test is going to be perfect. But we're getting more and more and better predictors of these things as we get bigger data sets. So as we get a bigger data set for the alcohol and more accurate data, that predictor gets better and better as well. And I haven't seen studies comparing someone's self-reported alcohol to our alcohol predictor. It'd be interesting to see that. But we do have it on the smoking, and our predictor's better than how much they say they smoke at least.
Yeah. Well, regardless, people, if it's a bad habit, people always report less. Like, even if people are tracking their food, they always report less if they're, so that's not uncommon. The interesting thing you say, and I mean, you've already said it, and I just want to reiterate it for anybody listening, is that, you have tests and things, but this is actually a test of how your body is responding on a precision genetic level to whatever it is. And I think that's what's so exciting. I mean, I don't know, I could just talk on and on about that, but
yeah.
anyway.
And you asked specifically where I see it going.
Yeah.
I focused in on the alcohol thing, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
But where it's going, so we've had, what I'm most excited about is over time there's been a rise of precision medicine and this rise of AI. And over the last 20 years is when these have been building. And they've both built to this big crescendo moment where coming together is extremely powerful. So for what I mean by that is just to be able to do the predictions of cancer like Grail or these chronic diseases or get all these EBPs, that's what we call these epigenetic biomarker proxies, these upgraded biomarkers, just to be able to produce those, you need machine learning to crunch the data and look at the million different gene sites and how much they're turning up and down. So AI has allowed us to make these incredible predictions about the future and get all this data. The next phase is large language models. So we built an app, I've got it on my phone right now, that you can input someone's genetics, their epigenetics, their blood work, all of this, and then interact with it. Because one problem I see is people are doing all these tests and they get all this data, they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
So like on this app that we have, when I was in Miami over the weekend, conference, I asked it one day, hey, what should I have for lunch? And it told me a specific meal at a specific restaurant, like 0.1 miles away from me. It was based on, it knows my genetics. It knew my blood work. It knows what my A1C and ApoB are. It knew how I'd slept the last night. It knew what I did for workout that day. I went for a run and lifted some weights, and it knew what I'd eaten up to that point. So it gave me the perfect meal for me in that moment in time. And to be able to take all of this data and then make decisions like that, I think is the future. Because next week when we launch this True Health test that has 160 to 180 biomarkers, what do you do with all that? How do you interpret all of that? So we're putting it on a large language model engine to where in the next few months we'll release this where people can interact. So when they get their true age and they get their true health and all these biomarkers and they upload other data, they can then talk to it and say, what are the top 3 things I should do to reduce my biological age? And it can look at what's off and look at all their other factors and tell them. And then you could say, from all the things that are off, like which ones should I be worried about? Which ones should I not? What lifestyle things can I do to improve my markers the best? And you can interact with the data and get useful information. So AI and precision medicine coming together right now is, I think, what the real future is.
Yeah, you were talking about that when we were visiting the other day. It's just mind spinning on that. That's like Star Trek, but it takes your wearables, it takes all your DNA stuff, and it's like a super doc that can process all that stuff and tell you what you can eat because it knows what restaurants are where you're at and what's on the menu.
Yeah. Has all of the world's information.
Yeah.
And all of your personal information. That's the cool thing about ChatGPT. Can tell you restaurants close by if you give an address, but for this to be able to do it for you, that's the cool thing.
Yeah, that's exciting. So when do you think people are going to have access to that? All this has happened really fast. I mean,
so technically we put that app out. We pulled it back. We got a little nervous about how good it was. We were worried the FDA would get in trouble for like AI practicing medicine. Yeah. Because it's hard to put guardrails on it and not get it to diagnose and stuff if you pushed it. Like I'll tell you an embarrassing one. I don't normally talk about this, but it's just us here. Yeah. One day I had I felt something on my back. And I was like, what is this? And I had these like several little blisters on my butt. It was just strange. It didn't really hurt or anything. I was like, what is that? I couldn't figure it out. After about a day, still couldn't figure it out. And so I was like, oh, let me ask Hollis, which is what we call the app. So I've got these weird blisters on my butt. No idea what it is. What could it be? And it immediately came back and said, it looks like you've been doing a lot more rowing exercise on your rowing machine. Could it be friction from that? And I was like, oh yeah, the day before they came up, I did this BFR band workout. It was very constricting for the shorts, pull everything in place, and I'm rowing. Like that's totally what it was. Like I'm a doctor, and I couldn't, and so it would impressed me but it also scared me a little bit because like, okay, this thing's not supposed to be making diagnoses. We took it down. And what we're going to do is we're going to be re-releasing it in the next little bit, specifically for Tru Diagnostic patients, because as we see the amount of information and data we're going to give them, we feel like it's necessary. And if we keep it in the little playground of like all the Tru D patients, then we feel a little bit better about it not being out there and letting people interact with all of that data. So we'll be pushing it out to Tru Diagnostic patients. So anybody that's using Tru Diagnostic tests, True Age or True Health, in the next several months when we push it out, those will be the first people that get access to it. We'll push it out to them because it's just a perfect use case in our mind.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. So you were doing RBF, like, so for anybody listening, that's restricted blood flow. And so you were doing that with your rowing machine. I guess you had that around your thighs and everything when that was going on.
I'll do both. I did that workout this morning. I rode for about 30 minutes and I did 10 minutes on the lower extremities and then 10 minutes on the upper extremities, each 8 to 10 minutes. And so it's a nice way to throw a little bit of resistance training and trick my muscles into think I'm doing something heavy when I'm really just rowing. So.
A little more bang for your buck and less stress on the joints. Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. That's a whole other conversation we could get into. But, well, man, I really appreciate your time, Matt. I'm really excited about what you're doing. This is just great. I've always been a big fan of the Tru Diagnostic. We do it on, everybody here. And I just think that I think what you're doing is really cool. And I'm really excited about the future and look forward to seeing what's coming down the pipes.
Thanks. And we'll have to, knowing that you do it for all your patients, that's great. So we'll get this AI. I may need to talk to you and see if we can get the AI up to you and your patients early too, just to test and everything. So if you're a patient of Kevin's, hopefully we can get the app to you more quickly.
Well, Matt, is there anything else that you feel like people need to know that you wish everyone knew and they don't, or anything else you want to talk about before I let you go? I want to be respectful of your time.
If you're going to open it up that broadly, what I would say is something I try to work in when I'm talking about biological age, which is the biggest, best study on this in the world on health span and happiness was the Harvard longitudinal study. They looked at decades, a massive number of people. And by far the number one thing when it comes to happiness and health span, not smoking, not alcohol, not obesity, exercise, it was connection and the strength of your social relationships. And so whenever I'm talking about what's really going to make the biggest difference, people always hear the molecules, the rapamycin, the supplements, but it's really that connection and strength of your social relationships. If you're not focusing on that, don't waste your time on all the biohacking stuff and all the sexy molecules.
That's a good point. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Well, man, thanks again. I really appreciate your time and look forward to staying in touch. And you guys enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Kevin.
All right. See you, man. See you guys.